Marcus Sullivan thought he was just cooling off after his morning jog. But when the park ranger slapped him with a $500 fine for unauthorized swimming, he didn't know that single moment would transform him from a struggling small-town teacher into the most feared property owner in Millbrook County. What started as a simple dip in Crystal Lake would end with an entire town begging for his mercy, and Marcus, holding all the cards in the August sun, beat down mercilessly on Marcus Sullivan's shoulders as he completed his third lap around Crystal Lake's perimeter trail. At 34, he'd been making this same 5-mile circuit every morning for 3 years, ever since Sarah left him and took half their savings along with her promises. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago, but the habit remained a ritual of punishment disguised as exercise. Sweat dripped steadily from his forehead, staining the faded Millbrook High School athletics t-shirt that had seen better decades. His teaching salary barely covered the mortgage on his small house across town, and the summer break meant 2 months without income. Every dollar counted, every expense calculated twice. The lake stretched before him like a mirror of liquid silver, perfectly still in the morning calm. Not a soul in sight, just the way he preferred it. The official swimming area wouldn't open for another 2 hours, but Marcus had been coming here since he was 8 years old. His grandfather had taught him to swim in these very waters, back when the lake was just a local swimming hole before the county turned it into a managed recreational facility. His legs burned from the run, and the temperature gauge on his phone read 87 degrees. The water called to him with an almost magnetic pull. "Screw it," Marcus muttered. Glancing around the empty shoreline one more time, he peeled off his shirt and running shorts, leaving them in a neat pile on the weathered dock. The water was exactly as he remembered, cool, clean, and blissfully refreshing. He dove beneath the surface, feeling the familiar embrace of weightlessness wash away the stress of unpaid bills and empty classrooms. For 5 precious minutes, Marcus floated on his back, staring up at the cloudless sky. This was peace. This was freedom. This was, "Excuse me, sir, you need to get out of the water immediately." Marcus's serenity shattered like glass. He treaded water, turning toward the voice that carried across the lake with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. A figure in a khaki uniform stood at the edge of the dock, hands on hips, radio crackling with static. "I said, get out, now." Marcus swam toward shore, his peaceful morning evaporating with each stroke. The ranger, stocky man in his 50s with a badge that caught the sunlight, watched him with the predatory focus of a hawk eyeing a mouse. "You realize you're in violation of County Ordinance 247B, the ranger called out as Marcus reached the shallow water. "Unauthorized swimming in a managed facility during non-operational hours. I've been swimming here since I was a kid," Marcus replied, wading toward his clothes. Water streamed from his hair, and he suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. There's nobody else around. Doesn't matter. Rules are rules. The ranger's nameplate read J. Kowalski. He was already pulling out a citation book, pen poised like a weapon. "ID, please." Marcus pulled on his shorts, his peaceful morning now a distant memory. "Look, Officer Ranger Kowalski, ID." The command brooked no argument. Marcus fumbled for his wallet, hands still damp, and handed over his driver's license. Kowalski studied it with the intensity of a scholar examining ancient texts. Marcus Sullivan, 412 Maple Street. The ranger's pen moved across the citation, pad with mechanical precision. Swimming in prohibited area during non-operational hours, $500. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. $500 for swimming, plus court costs if you decide to fight it. Kowalski tore off the citation and thrust it toward Marcus. The fine structure was updated last month. First offense is $500, second is $1,000, third is permanent, banned from all county recreational facilities. Marcus stared at the pink slip of paper, his hands trembling slightly. $500. That was his grocery budget for 6 weeks. That was his car payment. That was the difference between making his mortgage and falling behind. "This is insane," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm a teacher at the high school. I've lived here my whole life. I pay taxes that fund this place." Kowalski's expression didn't soften. "Then you should know better than anyone that rules apply to everyone equally. Have a nice day, Mr. Sullivan." The ranger turned and walked away, his boots crunching on the gravel path. Marcus stood there in the morning sun, holding the citation, feeling something cold and hard crystallizing in his chest. It was an anger knot, yet it was something deeper, more focused. That evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, the citation spread before him like evidence in a trial. His laptop was open to the county's website, and he'd been reading ordinances for 3 hours. The fine structure had indeed been updated not last month, as Kowalski claimed, but 3 days ago. The previous fine had been $50. His phone buzzed. A text from his ex-wife, forgot to mention need an extra $200 for Emma's school. Supplies. Can you Venmo tonight? Marcus stared at the message, then at the citation, then at his bank account balance on his phone screen. $1,247.83. The fine would drop him below $1,000 for the first time since the divorce. He called the number on the citation, navigating through an automated system that seemed designed to frustrate rather than help. Finally, a human voice answered. County. Clerk's office, this is Deborah. Hi, I got a citation today for swimming at Crystal Lake, and I'd like to understand the appeal process. What's the violation code? Marcus read the numbers from the citation. He heard typing on the other end. Swimming in a restricted area during non-operational hours, $500 fine plus $125 court costs if you contest it. You can pay online or mail a check to. Wait, I want to understand something. The lake is public property, right? Owned by the county. That's correct, and the county gets its funding from property taxes. Among other sources, yes. So, as a taxpayer, I'm essentially a part owner of that lake. A pause, sir. I'm not qualified. To discuss legal interpretations, if you want to contest the citation, you'll need to appear in court or hire an attorney. Marcus hung up and opened a new browser tab. His fingers moved across the keyboard with growing purpose. Crystal Lake Property Records, Millbrook County. What he found made him sit back in his chair. The lake wasn't county property. It was owned by something called the Millbrook Recreation Trust, which leased it to the county for $1 per year. The trust had been established in 1987 by a local businessman named Harold Whitmore, who donated the land for public use with the stipulation that it remain a recreational facility. In perpetuity, Marcus dug deeper. Harold Whitmore had died in 2019. His estate had transferred ownership of the trust to his daughter, Patricia Whitmore-Chun, who lived in Seattle and, according to her LinkedIn profile, was a tech executive who rarely visited Millbrook. Search revealed something interesting. Patricia had been trying to sell the property for 2 years. The asking price had dropped from $2.8 million to $1.9 million, and the most recent listing was 6 months old. Marcus's hands trembled as he opened his banking app. He had $1,247.83 in checking, $43,000 in savings, his half of the house equity. From the divorce and a $401k with about $87,000 that he could borrow against, it wasn't enough. Not even close. But Marcus Sullivan was a high school math teacher, and he was very good with numbers. He opened a new spreadsheet and began calculating. Small business loan, home equity line of credit. His father had always said he'd help Marcus. By property when he was ready to settle down and start a family, the irony wasn't lost on him. Sarah had left him because he lacked ambition, because he was content with mediocrity. She'd wanted someone who took risks, who thought big, who wasn't afraid to bet everything on a dream. Well, Sarah, maybe it was time to place a bet. Marcus picked up his phone and dialed his father's number. It rang twice before the familiar voice answered. Marcus, it's late, son. Everything okay? Dad, I need to ask you something. Remember when you said you'd help me buy property someday? Of course. You're thinking about getting out of that rental? Marcus looked at the citation on his table, then at the property listing on his screen. Something like that. Dad, how would you feel about co-signing a loan for about $2 million? The silence on the other end stretched so long that Marcus wondered if the call had dropped. $2 million? Son, what exactly are you planning to buy? Marcus smiled, for the first time all day. A lake, Dad. I'm going to buy a lake. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood on the same dock where Ranger Kowalski had handed him the citation. But this time, he wasn't alone. Patricia Whitmore-Chun stood beside him, elegant in her business suit, despite the August heat. Behind them, Small crowd had gathered: his real estate agent, his lawyer, a representative from the bank, and a notary public. The purchase had moved with surprising speed once Patricia realized Marcus was serious. She'd been trying to unload the property for months, and his offer of $1.7 million, financed through a combination of personal savings, family loans, and a commercial mortgage that made his accountant wins, had been accepted within 48 hours. The emergency meeting of the Millbrook County Parks and Recreation Department was called for 7 a.m. sharp, barely 12 hours after Marcus Sullivan had sent his text message to Ranger Kowalski. Department head Margaret Chun, no relation to the previous owner, sat at the head of the conference table, her usually pristine appearance showing signs of a sleepless night. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her normally perfect silver hair was slightly disheveled. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Margaret said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "A local high school teacher now owns Crystal Lake, our most popular recreational facility, and he's demanding $1,500 per visit from county employees." Legal counsel David Brennan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, a stack of hastily printed documents before him. "That's correct. Mr. Sullivan's purchase is completely legitimate. The property was privately owned and leased to the county for a nominal fee. Now that he owns it, he can do whatever the hell he wants," interrupted Parks. Superintendent Jim Kowalski, Ranger Kowalski's younger brother and immediate supervisor, including charging us whatever he feels like. Margaret rubbed her temples. "How many county employees regularly use the lake?" 43 staff members have active lake privileges," replied Administrative Assistant Carol Morrison, reading from her tablet. "That includes rangers, maintenance crews, lifeguards, and administrative personnel, plus their families." Jesus Christ. Margaret's carefully maintained professional demeanor cracked slightly. "If even half of them used the lake once this summer, at his rates, we're talking about $30,000 in fees." Brennan cleared his throat. "There's another issue. The lease agreement has a 30-day termination clause that can be invoked by either party. Mr. Sullivan could legally shut down all public access to the lake with a month's notice." The room fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of morning traffic. Crystal Lake generated over $200,000 in annual revenue for the county through admission fees, concession sales, and event permits. More importantly, it was the centerpiece of Millbrook's tourism industry. The annual summer festival, the high school swimming programs, the youth camp activities, everything revolved around the lake. "What does he want?" Margaret asked finally. "We don't know," Brennan admitted, his attorney and, "Yes, he hired one has, scheduled a meeting for this afternoon. They've requested that all department heads attend." Jim Kowalski slammed his hand on the table. "This is bullshit. Jerry was just doing his job. The guy was swimming during off hours, breaking clearly posted regulations. Since when does following the rules make you the bad guy?" "Since the rule breaker bought the rule book," Carol muttered under her breath. Margaret shot her a warning look. "We need to approach this professionally. Mr. Sullivan is now a major stakeholder in our community. We'll meet with him, understand his position, and find a reasonable solution." "Reasonable?" Jim's voice rose. "He's demanding $1,500 for county employees to swim in a lake their taxes used to pay for. Does that sound reasonable to you?" Before Margaret could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, and her face went pale. "What is it?" Brennan asked. Margaret held up her phone. "Mr. Sullivan? He says the meeting this afternoon has been moved to the lake. Quote, seems appropriate to discuss lake business at the lake. Bring your checkbooks." End quote. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as the county delegation trudged along the gravel path toward Crystal Lake. Margaret Chen led the group, followed by Brennan, the lawyer, Jim Kowalski, Carol Morrison, and Mayor Patricia Wang, who had insisted on attending despite Margaret's protests that this was a departmental issue. "I still don't understand how this happened," Mayor Wang said, her heels clicking awkwardly on the rough path. "We've had that lease for 30 years. Why wasn't I informed it could be terminated?" "Because it was never an issue before," Margaret replied through gritted teeth. The previous owner was happy with the arrangement. It gave her a tax break and ensured the property stayed undeveloped. They emerged from the tree line to find Marcus Sullivan waiting for them at the main beach. area, he'd set up a folding table with several chairs under a large umbrella. A cooler sat nearby, along with a briefcase and what appeared to be a brand new private property, no trespassing sign, that he was methodically installing in the sand. He looked up as they approached, hammer in hand. "Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. I thought we should meet on neutral ground." He gestured toward the lake with a slight smile. "Oh wait, my ground." Mayor Wong stepped forward, extending her hand. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm Patricia Wong, Mayor of Millbrook. I understand there might be some confusion about the lake's status." Marcus shook her hand politely, but didn't return her smile. "No confusion at all, Mayor Wong. I own the lake. The county's lease expired the moment I took possession, since it was contingent on the Whitmore Trust's ownership. New owner, new rules." "Now hold on," Jim Kowalski interjected, his face already flushing red. "You can't just— Actually, I can." Marcus set down his hammer and picked up a folder from the table. "I've had 3 different lawyers review the purchase agreement and property law. I have every right to control access to my property, set usage fees, and establish operating procedures." Brennan stepped forward. "Mr. Sullivan, surely we can reach some kind of accommodation. The lake has been a public resource for decades. The community depends on it." "The community?" Marcus repeated slowly. "That's interesting, because when I was part of this community, when I needed understanding, when I got hit with a $500 fine for taking a swimwear, was this spirit of accommodation then?" Margaret felt the conversation slipping away from her. "Mr. Sullivan, I understand you feel wronged, but surely we can discuss this like reasonable adults. What would it take to restore public access?" Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out a calculator, making a show of pressing buttons. "Let's see. $500 in fines, plus emotional distress, plus the cost of hiring lawyers, plus interest on the money I had to borrow, ... He looked up. "I think $2 million should cover it." $2 million. Mayor Wong's voice cracked. "That's more than our annual parks budget. Then I guess you have a problem." Marcus began packing up his materials. "Until the county pays what it owes me, Crystal Lake is closed to public access, effective immediately." Jim Kowalski stepped closer, his hands clenched into fists. "You son of a bitch. Do you have any idea how many people you're hurting? Kids who've been coming here every summer since they could walk? Families who can't afford to travel anywhere else for vacation." Marcus met his gaze steadily. "About as much as you cared when you told me rules were rules and fined me a week's salary for swimming in an empty lake. That's completely different. Is it because, from where I'm standing, it looks like the exact same thing? Someone with power making life difficult for someone without it. The only difference is which one of us is holding the power now." Carol Morrison, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "What about the swimming lessons? We have 60 kids enrolled in the program. Some of them don't know how to swim. It's a safety issue." For the first time, Marcus's expression softened slightly. "The swimming lessons can continue. I'm not interested in putting children at risk, but the instructors will need to pay the standard user fee, $1,500 per instructor per session." Margaret calculated quickly. "That's $12,000 a week just for swimming lessons." "Then, I guess you'll need to raise the lesson fees," Marcus replied, "or find a different lake." Mayor Wang pulled out her phone. "This is economic terrorism. I'm calling the county attorney. There has to be some kind of legal recourse." "Good luck with that," Marcus said. "I've already spoken with 3 different law firms. Private property rights are pretty well established in this country. As long as I'm not discriminating against protected classes, I can charge whatever I want." Brennan leaned forward. "What about a compromise? We could negotiate a new lease agreement, something fair to both parties." Marcus appeared to consider this. "I'm listening. We could increase the lease payment, maybe $1,000 a month." Marcus laughed. $12,000 a year for property worth nearly $2 million. I make more than that in interest, just by keeping the money in the bank. What would be acceptable?" Margaret asked. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened the calculator app. Fair market value for commercial lakefront property in this area runs about $15 per square foot per year. The lake covers approximately 60 acres, which is roughly 2.6 million square feet. So, about $40 million annually. The silence that followed was so complete that they could hear the sound of water lapping against the shore. "You're insane," Jim whispered. "I'm practical," Marcus corrected. "Look, I don't actually want $40 million. I want what I've always wanted, to swim in the lake where I grew up without being harassed by power-hungry bureaucrats who get their kicks from ruining people's days." He walked to the water's edge and gazed out at the perfectly still surface. "You know what the real tragedy is? I would have gladly paid $50 for a swimming permit. Hell, I would have paid $100, but instead of treating me..." The emergency county commissioners. Meeting was standing room only by 6 p.m. Word had spread through Millbrook like wildfire the lake was closed. Swimming lessons were canceled, and somehow it was all because of Marcus Sullivan, the quiet math teacher who lived on Maple Street. Commissioner Robert Hayes banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order to the packed town hall. "Please, everyone, take your seats. We'll address your concerns, but we need to maintain decorum." In the front row, Jenny Martinez clutched her 8-year-old son Diego's hand. The boy had been looking forward to swimming lessons all summer, and now his mother was trying to explain why the lake was suddenly off limits. "This is ridiculous," she muttered to her neighbor. "One man shouldn't be able to hold an entire town hostage." 3 rows back, Tom Bradley shifted uncomfortably in his metal folding chair. As owner of Bradley's Sporting Goods, the lake closure would devastate his summer sales. Beach chairs, inflatable rafts, fishing gear, swimming supplies. Of his annual revenue came from lake-related purchases. "There's got to be something we can do," he whispered to his wife. "Some kind of legal action." At the back of the room, Marcus Sullivan leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching the chaos he'd unleashed. He hadn't planned to attend, but curiosity had gotten the better of him. Now he stood quietly observing as his neighbors dissected his character, his motives, and his mental state with the casual brutality of small-town gossip. "The man's lost his mind," declared Gladys Hoffman, the town's unofficial gossip coordinator. "Ever since his divorce, he's been acting strange. Remember when he painted his house that awful green color? I knew something was off." "It's not about the color of his house," interrupted Lisa Chen, Margaret's sister and owner of the local cafe. "It's about power. He got a taste of it, and now he's drunk on it." Commissioner Hayes managed to quiet the crowd long enough for Mayor Wang to address them. She looked exhausted, her usual political polish dulled by stress. "I want everyone to know that we're taking this situation very seriously," she began. "We've been in discussions with Mr. Sullivan and his legal team, and we're confident we can reach a resolution that serves everyone's interests." "What kind of resolution?" called out Frank Morrison, Carol's husband and coach of the high school swim team. "My kids have regionals in 6 weeks. They need training time, and what about the summer festival?" added Rebecca Santos, chair of the tourism board. "We've got vendors coming from 3 states, bands booked, insurance paid for. The festival brings in $500,000 to local businesses. Without the lake, ... double quotes Mayor Wang held up her hands. "We're exploring all options, legal remedies, alternative venues, negotiated settlements. Just pay him what he wants," interrupted a voice from the middle of the room. Everyone turned to see Bill Harrison, a retired contractor who'd lived in Millbrook for 60 years. "Swallow your pride and write the check. It's cheaper than losing the lake forever." "With what money?" Commissioner Hayes shot back. "The man wants $2 million. Our entire annual budget is $12 million. We can't just then take it out of the Parks Department budget," suggested another voice. "They're the ones who created this mess." Margaret Chen, who had been sitting quietly in the front row, stood up. "If I may address that," her voice carried clearly through the packed room. The Parks Department was following established procedures. The fine structure that Mr. Sullivan objects to was approved by this very commission 6 months ago, a $500 fine for swimming. Jenny Martinez stood up, still holding Diego's hand. "That's insane. Who approved that?" The silence that followed was telling. Commissioner Hayes shuffled through his papers, avoiding eye contact. "The fine increases were part of a broader revenue enhancement initiative," he said finally. "Needed to offset budget cuts from the state. Revenue enhancement," Marcus said quietly from the back of the room. His voice wasn't loud, but in the sudden stillness, everyone heard him. "Is that what we're calling extortion now?" The crowd turned toward him like sunflowers following the sun. Some faces showed curiosity, others anger. A few showed what might have been sympathy. Mr. Sullivan, Mayor Wang said carefully, "I didn't realize you were here." Marcus pushed himself off the wall and walked slowly down the center aisle. "Thought I should hear what my neighbors think of me. It's been educational." "You son of a bitch." Frank Morrison stood up, his face red with anger. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to these kids? Swimming isn't just recreation for them, it's their future. College scholarships, Olympic dreams, Marcus repeated, stopping in front of Morrison. "That's interesting. You know what my dream was 3 weeks ago? To swim in the lake where my grandfather taught me, where I've been going since I was 8 years old without getting treated like a criminal." "You were breaking the rules." "I was swimming in an empty lake at 6 in the morning, bothering nobody." Marcus's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "And for that harmless act, your department tour committee decided I should pay more than I spend on groceries in 2 months. He turned to address the crowd. "How many of you have gotten traffic tickets, parking violations, late fees on library books?" A few hands went up hesitantly. "Did any of you think those fines were fair?" "That's different," called out Gladys Hoffman. "Traffic laws are for safety. Swimming in an empty lake at dawn is a safety issue," Marcus asked. "Or is it a revenue issue?" Commissioner Hayes banged his gavel. "Mr. Sullivan, if you have something constructive to contribute, I do." Marcus walked to the front of the room and turned to face the crowd. "I want to tell you exactly what it felt like to get that citation." The room fell silent. "I'm a teacher. I make $38,000 a year. After taxes, after my mortgage, after my car payment, I have about $400 a month for everything else. Food, gas, utilities, emergency repairs." He paused, looking around the room. $500 was more than I had. Jenny Martinez shifted uncomfortably. Her husband was also a teacher. "But it wasn't just the money," Marcus continued. "It was the way I was treated. Like I was some kind of vagrant who'd wandered onto private property. Like I didn't belong in my own hometown." He pulled the crumpled citation from his pocket. "Ranger Kowalski didn't just write me a ticket. He lectured me about rules applying to everyone equally. He told me I should know better. He made me feel ashamed for doing something I'd done thousands of times before." Marcus looked directly at Frank Morrison. "You want to talk about dreams? My dream was simple. I wanted to start my day with 5 minutes of peace in the water, where I learned to swim. Instead, I got a financial crisis and a lecture about being a second-class citizen in my own town." "So you decided to take it out on everyone else?" Morrison shot back. "I decided to stop being powerless," Marcus replied. "For the first time in my adult life, I had the means to push back. And you know what I discovered? When you have power, people suddenly care about fairness." He addressed the crowd. "Again, 3 weeks ago, not one person in this room gave a damn about whether a $500 fine was reasonable. It was just some guy they didn't know getting what he deserved for breaking the rules. But now that those same rules might inconvenience you—" "This isn't about us," interrupted Rebecca Santos. "This is about the community, the jobs that depend on tourism, the families who save all year for their lake vacations, the traditions that have been going on for generations." Marcus nodded slowly. "You're right. It is about community. So, let me ask you something. What kind of community were you building when you decided that people like me should pay a week's salary for swimming during the wrong hours?" The question hung in the air. Several people shifted in their seats. "And what kind of community are you building now?" Marcus continued. "When you're more worried about your inconvenience than you are about the fundamental unfairness that created this situation." Bill Harrison stood up again. "What do you want, son? Really?" Marcus was quiet for so long that some people began to murmur. Finally he spoke. "I want what I asked for this afternoon. A formal apology from the Parks Department. A reasonable fine structure that doesn't punish working people for minor infractions. And consequences for the ranger who treated me like garbage." "And if we do that," Mayor Wang asked, "the lake reopens immediately." "The lake reopens immediately?" Commissioner Hayes leaned forward. "What guarantee do we have that you won't? Just change your mind next week? Hold us hostage again the first time something else goes wrong?" Marcus smiled for the first time all evening. "The same guarantee I had that you wouldn't slap me with an unreasonable fine for swimming." The same guarantee any of us have that our neighbors will treat us fairly." He looked around the room one more time. None at all. The silence that followed was profound. Finally, Commissioner Hayes spoke. "We'll need to vote on this, Mr. Sullivan. Would you be willing to give us 24 hours to consider your terms?" Marcus checked his watch. "It's 7:15 p.m. on Thursday. You have until 7:15 p.m. tomorrow. After that, I'll assume you've decided the current arrangement works for you." He walked back toward the exit, but stopped at the door. "One more thing. I know some of you are thinking about legal challenges, eminent domain, zoning,